Hi, I'm an artist, and this is what my art looks like. That's right, I'm an anime-style artist. It's fun, it's cute, and I never actually had to learn how to draw faces because the faces are so simplified. But what if I, an anime artist, tried to draw realism? How hard could it possibly be? And is this worth learning even if you don't want to draw realism? I'm going to be explaining a lot, including some of my top secret techniques, so stay tuned if you're interested. But why did I suddenly want to draw realism anyway? So about 6 months ago, I was looking for a new game to play, and I discovered this game, Yakuza 0. I thought, this looks like a fun series to dabble in when I have time, and dabble I did. By dabble, I mean I marathoned 13 of the Yakuza games in 6 months. Understandably, after playing them, I am perfectly normal and mentally stable about all these characters, and I must draw fan art. But there's a big problem here. I don't know if you noticed, but these aren't anime girls. These are old men. Last time I tried to draw one, it kind of looked like this, so what should I do? I guess I'm gonna have to learn how to draw realism. But hang on, wait a second. Realism? What do you mean realism? These aren't real people. First of all, shh. Kiryu Kazuma, ex-Tojo clan 4th chairman, is real to me, and that's all that matters. Secondly, the art style for this series, I think, is real enough to practice realism. Okay, I know it sounds like cope, but listen to me. The best way for me to practice art is to do something I enjoy. Sure, I could go ahead and draw celebrities that I care nothing about, or I could draw fictional characters that I care very much about, and therefore have lots of fun drawing them. Studying can be boring and tedious sometimes, I get it. So if there's an opportunity to make it fun for myself, I'm going to take it. So let's get started learning. How do we get started? Well, there's no avoiding it. If I want to draw realistic heads, I'm gonna have to learn what a realistic head looks like. So how can you do that? One way is with the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. I wanted to refresh my knowledge on head construction, so this was the perfect place to go. Skillshare is the largest online learning community out there with thousands of classes. Not only can you learn drawing, but there are lots of other categories like design, film, animation, or even entrepreneurship. It's great to explore if you want to learn new skills. I've been checking out Ethan Yen's Head Drawing Basics course. It's a great way to learn or refresh your knowledge on realistic head construction. I know learning how to draw the head looks really overwhelming, but with Skillshare, everything is on demand so you can learn at your own pace, even if you're busy and have other responsibilities. Skillshare has also recently updated their website so you can find classes by software and material, which makes it easier than ever to find classes that are relevant to you. If this sounds interesting, the first 500 people to use my link in the description get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. Check it out, it doesn't cost you anything. And now, back to the video. Like I said, I like drawing in the anime style. Why have I even bothered learning this stuff? Even if you're drawing stylized heads and faces, knowing how a real head looks is super helpful. It'll make your stylized faces more believable and appealing, so it's worth studying. So I already did a bit of work on it using resources like the Anatomy for Sculptors book. There are lots of ways you can construct the head, including, but not limited to, the Loomis method. You don't have to know every individual muscle, but knowing the basic structure helps a lot. So drawing an accurate head is fine and all, but there's one important thing to know about realism. It's called likeness. What is likeness? In short, it's making sure that your drawing actually looks like a particular person. This usually isn't a big deal for more stylized characters. A lot of games and anime out there give everyone more or less the same face, and you mainly tell characters apart by their hair and accessories. This isn't a bad thing, by the way. A lot of people talk about same face syndrome, but in certain styles, it's not something that particularly bothers me. It also makes it easier to draw fan art because as long as you get the other things right, it'll still look like the character. Unfortunately, when doing more realistic drawings, it's not something you can get away with so easily. So how do you make a person look like a person? A lot of people think it's the individual features on a person's face that are important. For example, how round the eyes are. But that's not it. For likenesses, the most important thing is the proportions of the features and the relationships between them. How big or small the nose is compared to the rest of the face. How high the brow bone is. But it's not always easy to tell just by looking, so here are a few strategies I use to check. For starters, I have a base head that has pretty average proportions. I can use this head to measure against other faces, for example, just to see if the nose is wider than average. By the way, there's no perfectly right way to draw a base head. If you like, you can use Loomis's head proportions. Mine's a little different, but as long as you can draw it consistently, it works. When I use this head to measure, I can tell that Kiryu's nose here is relatively short compared to Majima's, which is relatively long. And Kasuga has relatively wide nostrils. Another way of checking is drawing triangles on top of the face to help you measure relationships between landmarks. Our eyes are good at telling when a triangle isn't quite the right shape. And only after we get these big relationships right, we can start looking at smaller details like the actual shapes of the brows and mouth. So we've covered likenesses, but now it's time to tackle my greatest weakness, shading. I know a lot of people enjoy shading, but I don't. But I still need to practice it, so I decided to draw some characters from the game, but just in black and white. I'm getting pretty comfortable with line art, so I just need to add shadows. Simple, right? But it turned out that this simple exercise was way harder than I expected. But does that really make sense? If I already have the line art, why would coloring them in change anything? Let me explain. When you only have lines, you can kind of get away with just implying the form. However, when you shade, you have to really start specifying and nailing down these forms exactly. A single wrong stroke can change the shape of something entirely. So I was having a really hard time trying to maintain likenesses because I kept accidentally changing the shape of the facial features. But that's not the only thing that was hard for me. I'm just bad at determining values in general. I start by doing a values draft. That's just 3 colors, a light gray, a dark gray, and something in the middle. There's only 3 colors. How hard could it be? So apparently there's a bunch of things you should consider even when you only have these 3 grays. First, you have to consider the spacing between the lightness and darkness of these grays. If they're too evenly spaced out, your image could look boring. Secondly, you need to think about how much of each gray you're using. You don't want to use an even amount of each gray. Vary it up. You may have heard of sayings like big, medium, small, or proportions like 60-30-10. This is something people say when they're talking about design. And it turns out you have to design your values as well. This wasn't too bad for me when I was just using a hard brush, but once I started blending things together, things got really muddy and mixed up, and I kept having to mess with the tone curves to separate the values again. When I'm finished, I just throw a gradient map on top for some quick colors and call it a day. Alright, it's time to see if I actually learned something from all this practice. I decided I'd draw my favorite character from the Yakuza series, Majima. I sat down on my tablet, opened a canvas, and got all ready to get started, but then I realized there was an enormous problem. I couldn't start this drawing because I was scared. I didn't have confidence in my own skills, especially in a style I wasn't comfortable with. I didn't think I'd be able to do my favorite character justice. So I decided I would have to resort to my secret technique, which is memes. Okay, wait, let me explain. If you look through my gallery, you'll notice that a lot of these drawings are kind of weird. Of course, I drew these for fun, but there's actually another reason. Here's the thing about meme drawings. They don't have to be good. Nobody expects them to be. I mean, technically, art doesn't have to be good either way, but a meme drawing turns the joke into the primary focus. The art is now secondary. Maybe it's just me, but knowing a drawing doesn't have to be good takes quite a lot of pressure off of me. So what if instead of just drawing Majima, I draw him in Hatsune Miku's outfit instead? I draw strange Mikus all the time anyway, so it's on brand for me, and it's probably also on brand for Majima. It doesn't have to be good if I'm just being silly. I can get started right away. I begin the drawing the same way as any other, with a rough sketch. I decide on the pose and get all the basic forms and shapes in place. I make sure to draw the anatomy a bit more detailed than I would for something more stylized, but overall it's a similar process. But when I start refining the sketch, things start to get very different. So I'm drawing realism now, which means I'm gonna have to use reference. That makes perfect sense. Almost nobody can draw a photorealistic thing from their head, except, okay. I hate using reference. Wait, let me explain. So I know using reference is a good thing, and whenever I use reference, my drawing always comes out better. It's just not fun. Remember, for me, it's fun before dementals. It really interrupts the flow of drawing for me. Tabbing between my canvas and Google to set up a reference sucks. Not to mention, sometimes it takes ages to find a suitable reference. Scrolling through endless images, many of which are AI now, is just not my idea of a good time. But like I said, this time I have no choice, so I'm just gonna have to grin and bear it. I have the basic idea of my illustration in place, so I find some references to match the idea I have and correct my drawing if I need to. For example, the shirt and the hand. And of course I have many references with Majima himself. It's not quite as simple as just copying the references though. They often aren't an exact match for lighting and angle, so I do have to adapt them to my needs. While I'm doing this, I also start filling in some value blocks to help me start drafting out the composition, and when I'm happy with the flat values, it means it's finally time to start rendering. Ugh, I hate rendering. But I guess it can't be avoided if I'm drawing realism, right? I stick with grayscale for now because I don't want to have to worry about colors yet, which are really complicated. I quickly grab a soft brush and start softening up my edges and adding more shadows. But something isn't right here. Look at how messy all my brush strokes are. I spent all this time doing a clean values draft and then proceed to just mess everything up. I realize that when I render, I'm not really thinking of what I want to achieve. I tend to just scribble randomly, and if it looks bad, I just undo. In part, this was also a problem with my brush. It was a very soft, painterly, transparent brush, so it encouraged the scribbling to build up opacity. I quickly create a new, denser brush to help me block in shapes more cleanly. This actually helped a lot more than I expected. I'm gonna have to clean up the brush strokes anyway, so I may as well keep them clean right now when it's in black and white, when it's easier to do. What a pain. What am I even doing here? Is this even worth it? It better be. So I do that, and now that I have a set of clean values, it's time to turn it into a full color image. Looks like I can't avoid color anymore. A lot of people have asked me about my grayscale to color process, so let's cover it quickly here. It's pretty simple. Is this Miku colored? This is pretty Miku colored. I'm just gonna approximately brush on the right colors right now. I just make a new overlay layer on top and start slapping some colors down. You can also use the color layer, but I find you have to understand color theory and especially chroma extremely well to use this. The overlay layer I find is a bit more forgiving. It might take a bit of trial and error to get the color you want, but that's okay. Some people might have tried this process before and found that their shadows look really muddy. But here's how to avoid that. Just make sure your shadows are a different color. Because the background is blue, I make sure to shift my shadow colors a little bit towards the blue as well and make them more saturated. So when I'm done with my color layer, this is how it looks. But this is just the rough colors. There's still more to do. It's time to start the final polishing stage, so I merge everything down onto one layer and start painting on top of it. I'm really glad at this point that I took the time to clean up my values because it's much easier to add detail if the rough colors are nice and clean. Anyway, this part took ages. I was seriously questioning my life choices while doing this. That was not saturated enough. This stinks. Everything stinks. What was I thinking? Why did I try to draw a foreshortened arm in a style I have no experience in? Why did I decide to paint this entire tattoo by hand? It felt like this part would never end, but eventually, of course, it did. And this is what the result looked like. You know, considering it's my first time attempting an illustration in this style, I don't think it's too terrible. But there's a lot to improve on, of course. For one thing, I think calling this realism might be a bit of a stretch. It's certainly more realistic than my usual style, but it's still pretty stylized. The pose is also pretty stiff. It wasn't the best pose to begin with, but I seem to have a weird time maintaining the appeal of my sketch as soon as I start rendering. I also don't think I did a good job with the clothing. The shirt in particular doesn't look like it belongs in the scene, mostly because the lighting is off. I'll definitely need to do more clothing and drapery studies in the future. But even though I'm not super happy with this illustration, I learned a lot during the process of creating it, which makes it okay. If you enjoyed this video, try drawing the subscribe button in a realistic style. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!